Welcome to Life's a Beach podcast. This is an emotional and mental health podcast. My name's Caitlin, and I'm here with Jared, and we're just going to jump right in. So life can be very stressful, as we know. We're balancing work. We're balancing life outside of work. Also, the past 3 years have been just really hard and stressful, too, with COVID and the 531 tragedy. And today we're going to sort of be talking about how we can cope better with this sort of stress.
Yeah, and that's not just in Virginia Beach. I mean, studies show that both alcohol and substance abuse has increased since the pandemic began in 2020. And the more a person finds relief from alcohol or substances, the more likely that they're going to turn to it in times of stress. So that's really what we wanted to talk about today, is really what is alcohol and substance abuse, how we can identify addiction, and how we could just better manage our stress without having to turn to alcohol or substances. So we're really excited to be joined by Dr. Christy Norwood. Christy, welcome.
Thank
do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Jared said, I'm Dr. Christy Norwood. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I get the pleasure of serving as the director of the Student Mental Health Counseling Center at Hampton University. And I also dabble a little bit in private practice, and so I have a chance to work with mostly adults in my private practice as well. So I'm excited to be here with you all.
That's awesome. So we're just going to jump right in.
Yeah.
Could you first just talk about the trends that you've noticed in the past 3 years regarding substance abuse?
Yeah. So, what we've seen is just an increase in people using substances, particularly alcohol, and also like marijuana as well. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about it, the past 3 years, we've had ups and downs. But in the midst of the pandemic, we've seen people struggle with job loss or job changes. We've seen people sort of be at home. We've seen stay-at-home orders, things of that nature. And so with that has come with, okay, well, what do I do with my time and how do I manage this transition? And so for some people, that has looked like increasing alcohol use, increasing substance use as a way to cope, but also with boredom, right? So it's like, I have this extra time. What do I do with it? And so we've definitely seen those increases. I think the research says about 20%. We've seen about a 20% increase, amidst the pandemic. And that's been pretty prominent among women, especially as well. So we're seeing those increases.
So from what point does it go from, just an increase to that level of abuse, would you say?
Yeah. So I think we want to look at differences, right? And so if I am, at home and typically maybe I have a couple glasses of wine, let's just say hypothetically, during the course of a week, and I can kind of still manage my responsibilities, then I might be okay, right? But let's just say the pandemic happens, as it has for all of us, and all of a sudden my alcohol use, if I, as someone who identifies as a woman, has increased to, let's say, 7 drinks a week. Well, I might be sort of moving towards that level of alcohol, what we would call alcohol misuse condition or disorder in the mental health world. And so you want to kind of look at what are some of the things that are occurring where it's getting in the way of me living my life, whether that's socially, whether that's academically, whether that's employment-wise. You want to also look at sorts of things like how is it impacting my health? Right? When am I engaging so much in trying to obtain this substance or using this substance or trying to recover from use that I'm not able to sort of engage in other activities? And that's where you're sort of heading to that level of we may have a situation or a condition or alcohol misuse or substance use disorder that we may need to look at.
Interesting. I know that in a previous conversation that we had, we sort of talked about avoidance.
Yeah.
Did you want to touch on that any?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with the pandemic, we've all experienced so much stress, right? And so as human beings, who wants to sit with anxiety? Who wants to sit with sadness? All of those sorts of things that the pandemic has brought up for most of us. And so with that can come, well, what can I do as a human being so I don't have to deal with these uncomfortable feelings that are inside? And so when that happens, the normal reaction for some of us, we may choose use healthy strategies like, exercise, like socializing with friends, going to therapy, things of that nature. But for some of us, we say this is just too unbearable, so I may need to drink, right? And that's just a form of not dealing with what's happening inside. And so while alcohol use in particular can sort of be a social element for some people, over prolonged periods of time, when the use becomes too high, it can become problematic. And so it feels good in the moment, right? With the avoidance, it's like, okay, right now I'm intoxicated. I don't have to feel the effects of the pandemic or anything else that's going on. But then when I'm not intoxicated, what happens? All that stuff just comes back. And then it's just that cycle where I have to just continue to utilize those substances in order to be able to cope.
So rather than avoiding, I know you mentioned some people might turn to exercise.
Yeah.
I mean, what are some other ways that we can better manage, our stress, whatever it might be, rather than turning to alcohol or substances?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is for like all of us just to keep talking, right? So to talk about whether it's the stress of the pandemic, or I know for a lot of moms, they've talked about just how do you navigate trying to help your kids if you have children or grandchildren, like being able to, school them at home, but then also like the transition of going back to work. What do we want our life to look like? And so with that, it's like, I need to find spaces that are brave and safe where I can feel comfortable to like talk about how I'm feeling, even if it's not a great day, right? So we can kind of normalize that. And then I think also figuring out what are your values, right? So what's important to me? We're still sort of in this pandemic, but we've been given an opportunity to reflect on what do we value, what's important, what gives my life meaning. And so if it's, I need to go horseback riding, then you need to find a way to do that, right? If it's, I need to advocate with my boss so that I can telework part-time, then that's what you need to do. But figuring out what is really important to me, and then moving in those directions intentionally and making time for those things that are important can be extremely helpful. And then I'm always an advocate for therapy. So, therapy is a really nice space if you don't have someone in your life in particular that you feel comfortable enough, like exploring some of these questions or concerns or emotions with. You can always use therapy as a resource as well.
How do you make time to sort of figure those things out? If it's like, I need to cope, but I don't know how would you suggest someone goes about doing that?
Yeah. So I think the same way that we hopefully get up in the morning and brush our teeth and shower and try to get good sleep, it's sort of, what do I need to do intentionally today to pour into myself? And I share with a lot of the patients that I work with is we all can at least devote 3 minutes a day. Right. So you might need to start small with 3 minutes and then build up to 20 minutes. But if you can say, you know what, today I'm going to leave work and I'm going to sit in the parking lot and just practice breathing exercises to bring my body down. Right. As opposed to going to the ABC store and grabbing a drink. Right. Or you might need to say, OK, I need to set up for someone to watch my kids or my grandkids so that I can go to a 30-minute spin class. Right. Or I might need to, as opposed to spending money on, buying substances or alcohol, maybe I need to reward myself for not drinking every day this week. And I don't know, I love Amazon, making an Amazon purchase, And so it's about really intentionally taking this space to sit down and figure out how can I sort of change these behaviors, and then recognizing that I need to change these behaviors, right? They're having some kind of negative effect on me.
Yeah.
What about for those who might drink alcohol or use substances maybe regularly, but it's not to that extreme level? How would you recommend? Would it be the same, to cut down, or I guess two parts? When does it get to the point where it becomes too much, I guess?
Yeah. So, again, I think you want to look for when is it starting to become problematic for you? So, what sort of the alcohol organizations kind of indicate is that for men, if you are drinking 14 drinks a week, then you're probably in excess, right? You may be in that problematic range. And for women, it's about 50% of that. So about 7 drinks a week. And so when you start to see yourself heading in that direction, you might be in sort of this kind of gray area that, wait a minute, I might need to scale back. For some people, when that use starts to become too much, it's let me just cut it cold turkey. But a lot of times it might be, okay, I'm now having 3 drinks a week. I'm 50% almost to 7. So maybe what I need to do is scale back to 2 weeks, 2 drinks a week. And then I need to scale back to 1 so that it's a little bit more it's a little bit easier to be able to shift that change a little bit as opposed to cold turkey, because oftentimes most people, if that substance or if alcohol is around you, it's going to be very difficult, right? If there's an ABC store nearby, it's going to be very difficult just to stop using cold turkey without like a formal treatment plan. But if you can sort of start to scale back a little bit and shift those behaviors, it can be a little bit more manageable.
Could you discuss some of the treatment options that are available?
Yeah. So I think starting like number one is what can I do in the safety of my own home or space, right? And so there's apps like Sunnyside is a great app where you can kind of log on in your own house and like you can send text messages, for example, to yourself and sort of identify what are my drinking habits, what are my drinking patterns, for example. And then from there, it could be you're noticing that there might be, you know, some sort of behavior that you want to change. So it might be now I want to seek outpatient mental health resources, right? Which is, let me talk with a therapist about this behavior, right? We used to use this sort of cut and dry mentality where you just don't drink, abstinence, period. And what we found in research is that just doesn't work for people, right? But if I can explore like what's underneath the drinking in a place that feels safe, or what's underneath the substance use, then I'm likely to be much more successful, right? So that would be sort of the next step up from there. But sometimes we need a more aggressive level. And so for some people, you know, if they're not able to discontinue or decrease their alcohol or substance use, it might mean a formal treatment program. So that could be going and staying overnight where you're in a protected space, where you're learning the tools to cope with whatever's kind of going on inside, but you're also not having alcohol or substances at your disposal. So that way, once you're discharged from those type of environments, you will hopefully have those tools and resources to be successful, to live your life without having to abuse or misuse substances.
I like what you said about exploring what's underneath the drinking, because I feel like a lot of times people don't even, I mean, I don't know, they don't think to think deeper. And do you feel like that's like a hard thing for people to do, or is it easy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really hard.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for all of us because we're just not socialized to just like stop and sit and be still and notice what's happening, right? Like even think about social media. If any of you all are on social media, right? We just scroll and scroll and scroll, right? And so we're kind of taught to do these sort of mindless kinds of things and to sort of function in that way, as opposed to saying, okay, well, wait a minute, what am I feeling and what's happening inside? And so depending on which level you choose, it's giving you that space to like actually pause and reflect on what's happening with you. But if we can all do that every single day, even if it's starting with 60 seconds to just focus inward, then over time, you're teaching your mind and your body, hey, these experiences aren't that scary, right? And I don't have to avoid, they might be scary, but like I don't have to avoid them, right? And I can sort of allow myself to deal with them when they come up in a healthy way.
And that 60 seconds might be more obtainable than, you know, a 30-minute or 60-minute session, just like you would carve out time to brush your teeth or walk your dog or whatever it might be, those kind of bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
I did just want to kind of backpedal something you had mentioned earlier about like maybe some problematic behavior maybe at work or at home. I mean, what are some common signs of those in different areas, I guess?
Yeah. So I think like if you're starting to spend lots of time sort of seeking out that substance or seeking out alcohol, that's going to be a shift. Irritability. You know, if we're starting to like snap on people, or if we're starting to just not have the same level of patience that we used to have, that can be a sign. Also, when you're not intoxicated, right, when those feelings come up, feeling the urge to constantly be able to go seek out that substance or alcohol use can definitely be a sign that sort of we're moving towards that problematic level. And then, you know, when you stop engaging in activities that you usually do, so like all of a sudden you're showing up to meetings late, right? Because you're having a hard time trying to recover. All of a sudden you're not meeting responsibilities with, you know, whether again, if you have children or just loved ones or grandchildren, you're not meeting those responsibilities because of the effects of the substance. The other piece is like physically, right? So I know for myself, as I get up there in age, right? It's like, geez, I don't recover in the same way I did when I was 20 or 25, just generally speaking. And so when you start to see, oh my goodness, like I'm sleeping for longer periods of time, or I'm noticing that my heart rate is constantly elevated, or my family members are concerned about me because I always seem to be dragging, right? They may not know exactly what's going on. Those are just some of the signs that, hey, I may need to sort of at least look at this behavior and shift it a little bit.
What if you are someone who's on the other side of it? You're a coworker or a friend.
Yep.
What responsibility, if any, do you think those people have if they're noticing this behavior?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was raised in an environment where it was like it takes a village to raise a child. But like I feel like, especially with this pandemic, it's like we're all in this together. It's such a shared experience. And so I do feel like we have a responsibility, at least to try to support people who may be struggling. And so I think the first thing to do is to help people understand the changes that you're seeing, but saying that behaviorally. So what does that look like, right? So it might be, Caitlin, I'm noticing that like at the beginning of the year, you always came to our Friday staff meetings on time and you were like alert and asking questions. And I'm noticing like now you're kind of strolling in like 10 minutes late or you don't seem as alert. Is there something going on, right? So then I'm not saying you look like you're recovering from, being hungover or intoxicated or something of that nature. I'm kind of behaviorally saying what I'm seeing. And that gives you space to not be defensive, but to say, I just haven't been sleeping really well because of my stress. Or you may say, I may be drinking a little bit more. So I think having those conversations can be really helpful. I think also being comfortable enough to say like, hey, I noticed that, when we go out for happy hour, let's just say that usually you only have 2 glasses of wine, but the last few times we've gone out, you've had 4 or 5. Like, is something going on? Are you drinking more typically, or is it just with us? And not being afraid to ask those questions and to comment on those behaviors. Because oftentimes, when people are having behavior changes like that, they're looking for someone to help them, right? They may not know how to convey that, but it's like, hey, I'm struggling here and I want someone to be able to support me, but I may not have the words or I may not have the courage in this moment to be able to share with you exactly what's going on. But when you ask me the question, then that opens the door for here's someone who's willing to listen, right? And I think the other piece is to ask people, how can I help you, right? Like, I want to support you. How can I be of support to you? And recognizing that we may need to have these conversations multiple times.
Do you have any like words of hope or resiliency maybe to someone that is struggling right now, or just to the community as a whole? If someone might know someone that is struggling.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is thank you for listening to this, right? I think on top of that, it would be that this is not the end. Right? You may be going through a really hard experience. You may feel really alone and as though other people don't understand your experience, but there are people who have definitely gone through these similar experiences, and there's help that's available for you and to you. It's just about connecting to the right people, and don't be afraid to share what you're going through. These are hard times for all of us, and don't be afraid to ask questions if you know someone is dealing with a difficult time, because you may be the one person that has been sent to be able to help them make a change and to feel better.
That's so good. Wow.
Thank you.
I think that we will leave it on that. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Helpful.
Great conversation.
Yeah. And so, like Christy said, there's a ton of resources that are available. We have a few resources available to Virginia Beach City and school employees, so I'm going to read them off now. So if you or someone you know is in a crisis, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK and speak with a skilled, trained counselor at a crisis center in your area anytime, 24/7. Virginia Beach City and school employees are encouraged to contact their Employee Assistance Program through Humana for short-term counseling for areas like substance abuse and emotional wellness, plus a wide array of work-life services that can help you balance the many tasks you may have. And you can call them at 1-800-448-4358 or go to humana.com/EAP. Humana also has a webinar on substance abuse, addiction, and those that you care about, and you can find that on our YouTube channel. And then you can also go to www.rethinkingdrinking.niaaa.nih.gov. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Life's a Beach, a forum for VB City and school staff to hear and participate in everyday discussions about how we're thinking, feeling, and doing.
And speaking of VB City and school staff, we'd love to hear from you. Please fill out our mental and emotional health topic survey and tell us what you want to hear about in the future. You'll find the link in the description for this episode. And please, remember to like this episode and subscribe to our VB Benefits YouTube channel. Just click that button. You can do it. We believe in you.